Oh, man, I'm getting so good at those music cues. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another edition of the Rec.poker podcast, Forums edition. I'd like to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, Learn Pro Poker, Website AMP, and the small business community for sponsoring this podcast. And I'd like to thank this wonderful group of poker players who have come to join me to talk about poker, my favorite thing in the whole darn world, other than the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'm Jim Reid. You can find me on Twitter at Hold'em_Steelers. I'm Bluffsterini in the home games, and Chris Jones is next in line.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5x5 on Twitter and the Poker Stars home game.
And I am John Somsky, and I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Rob Rossum. I'm Rabman50 everywhere.
And just like every week, we are playing against each other in the nightly Rec Poker home game. Someone just took some chips away from Rob, which just makes life easier for everybody else. So we appreciate that. And just like every week, we're going to take one discussion post from the rec.poker forums and talk about it here on the show. This week, we're joined by a special guest, 2 weeks in a row, Kim Petvet. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, I'm looking forward.
All right. I'm Kim. I'm Fergie56 on the home games and Petvet everywhere else. And I'm happy to be here.
I don't want to break any news, but this is one of our other Canadian members. So I just want you guys to know we're taking over. We're 2 out of 5 right now. So take that, folks. So here we are. We've got a post. This week we're talking about bet sizing. We've got a post from E. Anderson85, Eric Anderson, who is a stalwart here at the Rec Poker Forums. And he says that this is a bad beat, but that's not what it's about. He promises. So this is talking about bet sizing. So he was studying called float bets this morning. And he wants to know, given the situation, given the action, what should the sizing have been? So Hero wakes up with King, which is obviously a great place to be. And they're pretty deep, I think, with a couple small stacks in there. And the Hero is playing out of the small blind with 98 big blinds. So the action comes around to middle position +1, who raises to 2 1/4 big blinds. The button calls, and Hero has an opportunity to now call or raise. So just right there, there's a raise and a call. We're out of position with King. Feels like I don't like to use mandatory often, but this feels like a mandatory 3-bet. Does anybody want to argue for any other action? Doesn't look like it. So I think that's another one of those general rules we love around here. If you get a chance to squeeze with King in a spot like this, you probably should. And then when it comes to sizing, Hero raises to 8.93, which is, and he's got a little formula down here where he talks about the multiplier of the original open size and then the dead money in there, and then like adding a big blind. And when he does that math, it comes out to a little over 10 big blinds, which I think is closer to the sizing I would use in a spot like this. What do you guys have? Does anyone have an immediate response when it comes to just talking about 3-bet sizing in a spot like this? It's a squeeze spot. You're out of position. Where would you typically want to raise to here?
I personally, especially sorry, Chris, do you want to go ahead?
No, you go for it.
I was going to say, because I answered on the post, that being out of position is you really want to raise bigger, and these are really deep stacks they're playing in this game. I think they were close to 100 big blinds or 80 big blinds deep. So I think that you really want to put your opponents to a significant decision here and raise in the neighborhood of 11, 12 big blinds. You've got the flat caller in there that you have to take into consideration, and they're getting such good odds that I'm surprised they wouldn't both call with just that smaller raise.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, last week when we were talking with Kim about donk betting, we talked about how a very small bet or raise really doesn't put your opponent to a difficult decision. It's sort of like a trivial decision, just continue in the hand. And I think when they get to play in position, by only adding, I don't know, something like 6 big blinds to it here, you're going to get some folds, but they're the kind of hands that you'd rather stick around. Like, they're going to be those worse opens that he has, like the King 10 offsuit, some of the hands that you have dominated. And I think you're better off with the bigger sizing here, I guess, is the is the consensus. So here we go. In this particular case, middle position 1 folds, and the button calls the extra 6.6 big blinds. So the flop comes, there are 22 big blinds in the pot. The flop comes 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs, 8 of clubs. And did we have the king of clubs? Let's just double check here.
Yes.
We did.
Yes.
So this is such an interesting spot. Monotone flop. We've got an overpair with a redraw to the second nut flush, and we have 3-bet. What is our play on this particular flop in this spot? Take it, Kim. What do you got?
This is usually a spot where you're either way ahead or way behind, in my opinion. So I think in this position, being out of position, I would always check this flop, especially since I have the king of clubs in my hand. I'm going to look to being check calling. I would never check raise, and depending on the size, I may even check fold. I think this flop is better for our opponent. They have all the sets in their range and all the straights in their range.
So I just want to talk.
Even in the ace high flushes in their range.
So I just want to, for some of our listeners, you said that we've got the king of clubs, which makes you less inclined to act aggressively with it. Can you just talk a little, because I think some people would say, oh, I've got the king of clubs. Like, I've got a redraw here. I've got an overpair. This is exactly the kind of spot I want to be getting chips in. Can you just talk a little bit about why that actually might make you decide to play this more passively or slower?
I would play it passively anyway, but it makes a difference between check calling and check fold.
Okay. And just elaborate on that a little, or Chris, if you want to.
Well, I that would be one point where I would play it slightly different. If I had 2 red kings here, I would be c-betting this hand. But because I have the king of clubs, I'm checking it. And the reason is because if my 2 red kings, there's a lot of hands I can fold out on this board. The monotone board is going to be scary to my opponent, but there's a lot of hands they're going to continue with, and they've got a lot of strong hands in their range. If I get check raised with my 2 red kings, I'm not in a world of hurt. I can easily fold that. It's fine. But if I get check raised with the king of clubs, now I'm in this, but I got the redraw. I'm like talking myself into making bad calls, and suddenly I'm getting into like digging. So like, I don't want to mess with that at all. That's why I'm checking it. I'm getting, and if they check through, great. I might continue on a turn depending on what that turn is. But that king of clubs gives me that fallback, but it's also a hand that this is not a hand I want to play for stacks. We have a pretty marginal spot here. It's, we started off, we're like all excited. We got the kings. Yay, let's go. Let's get stacks in. This flop has changed that plan entirely. We don't want that to happen. We want to navigate this hand towards a pretty cheap showdown if we can. Unless we hit that club, and we don't want to have sort of put many barriers between us trying to draw to that club if we think that's our only way of winning this hand. So I do not want to be check raised with that king of clubs in my hand.
I really like that. Especially when you say with the 2 red kings, and I'm assuming you're betting and you're not going to call a raise.
Yeah, I'm betting small and I'm folding to a check raise.
And would it, who was in the button affect that at all? Like, I know I am kind of getting you both ways. So I'm saying A in a vacuum, and now I'm saying not in a vacuum. But like, I'm often these monotone flops. Every time I'm in position, I'll just tell you, if you want to beat me at poker, every time I'm in position, if I have the aggression, I'm always betting a third pot 100% of the time, almost no matter what I have. And if someone, depending on who does that to me, I might be more inclined to just show over top of them, whether I like, because I think they're doing it 100% of the time as well. Monotone
boards are the sort of ultimate I mean, even more than a paired board, I think they're the ultimate chicken board. Like,
yeah.
like you either have it or you don't, right? And like, and there's very few, like, you know, like you either have the nuts or you don't, right? And so, they are boards that can lead to that sort of like leveling war and that aggression war, because like anybody can sort of like say, yeah, but do you really? But do you really? And like, so yeah, you can do that. But I mean, I think that what I think the reality is that people don't play them as aggressively, maybe even as they should. That they are scary boards for a lot of reasons, and you know, people tend to play them passively. So I think the odds of you getting check raised a lot on that board are low.
Or just raised, I guess, yeah.
Right, or raised, right.
Yeah, sorry, their
right.
position, yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I like leading small with the red kings, and I like checking with the king of clubs.
So it's kind of a one and done type of bet on this board.
Yep.
Yeah.
And because of monotone boards are the best boards to bet small on, because you're going to learn a lot about your opponent's hand. And I think most players, unless you're up against a really sophisticated opponent, they're really inelastic to sizing in terms of like how they're going to respond to a small bet on a monotone board, because they're either going to have it or not, and they're either going to raise you or not. And you can learn a lot by the way, and you don't need to invest a lot of your stack to find out where your opponent stands on those boards.
Yeah, it was funny you were saying how people play them cautiously, and even if you have the flush, you don't want to chase your opponent away. You know, you want to keep him in there with that flush draw if you've already got the made flush.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times you might make that bet, and the guy with the flush is just going to call.
Unless it's a real low one.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you had 2-3 of spades or something.
But yeah, I think that's a good point.
But that's, you know, people are going to play it slowly, whether they have it or not, or whether they're representing it or not, because they don't want to chase their potential money away.
And that's a great point, Chris. We just to take everyone behind the curtain a little, we were just taping the podcast with Michael Acevedo, and he was saying specifically on paired boards, you know, the solver GTO solution is if you're in position with initiative, just to min bet one big blind, no matter what the pot is on those paired boards, that king, jack, jack kind of example, because you can elicit the same response with a very small bet that you can with very big bets. And I think the monotone flop is another example of that, where, you know, people get scared. They don't continue with a minimum defense frequency. They just continue with the hands that they think can improve. And that's a very small portion of their range at that point. So if you can leverage those kind of folds with a small bet, there's no reason to make a bigger bet when you're only ever going to be behind when that action continues. So I think that's so let's actually try and answer Eric's question here a little bit. So pre-flop, I think we all agree 11 or 12 big blinds is better as a range sizing for what you're going to be doing there in every spot. And then what was it on the flop here? So the flop comes club, 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 and hero leads about half pot into it. So do we think that there is a sizing that's appropriate for this, or do we just think this plays better as a check, or what's our take on that?
So if I was going to lead, I would lead small. I would lead that same sort of 25 to 30% pot type bet. I think a check is a preferable play here, but I would lead small on this board.
And I think that one of the things there is you kind of have to wonder what is your opponent continuing with, because if you're going to lead small enough that they're getting the right odds to call with a flush draw, then you might as well just check. Like if you're not actually going to fold out any of those hands, and with exactly a hand like pocket kings, you don't really care if a random queen or jack or 10 comes, because that's not going to be an overpair. That's not going to be an overcard to your pair. Like maybe if you were in here with, what was the flop again, like 7-8-4 or something, if you were in there with, you know, top pair and half the deck was an overcard. You've got more to protect against, even if we're not talking about flushes, if you're trying to actually protect your equity in the hand. But even then, the problem with king on a flop like this is one pair is not likely to win the hand by the time the hand's over. And it doesn't really matter how strong your hand is on the flop. What matters is this the kind of hand where a one pair hand is going to win at showdown? And if not, you're really just bluffing or bluff catching. And so pocket kings can turn into a marginal holding really quickly, with or without that king of clubs. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, and as this hand continues to progress, it becomes less important that we have kings and more important that we have the king of clubs. Like the fact that we have kings as this hand progresses almost is irrelevant. Like we're losing to all value. So, we're just at that. If we keep continuing this hand, we're just hoping to spike a club, basically.
And that's going to be the case. We can extrapolate from that, guys, because that's going to be the case in a lot of spots where you've got a dynamic flop like this, and you've got a one pair hand like that. This comes up a lot where you're out of position. You've got what by the end of the hand will be a marginal holding, and these are rarely spots where you want to be increasing the size of the pot on the flop. Typically what you want to do, what you're going to do is you're going to create a bigger pot for someone to take away from you later when they have you beat. And it's going to be hard to make a bet big enough to actually elicit the folds that you want to get from them. It just seems like one of those spots where you need to recognize that by the time the hand is over, one pair is not going to be strong enough to get three streets of value, and so you got to choose your streets or choose your sizing. So as it's played out, we get to the turn. There's two players left. 45 in the pot. The 9 of spades comes, which is pretty bricky. But what was the original flop? All I'm seeing is dinosaurs and big question marks.
4, 7, 8 of clubs, 4, and 7, now we have the 9 of spades.
So it does kind of straighten out a little bit. Thank you, John. Thank you. And now hero checks, and the button shoves. And this is kind of what we were talking about before, where when you check here, you're also kind of capping your range a little bit, and a lot of the hands that are. How many hands do you have that are 3-betting pre-flop and continuing on the monotone board, and then checking here that can respond, that can call a shove? I'm just trying to do some quick range work in my mind, and most of those hands are going to be in a bad spot by the time the turn player wakes up. Now, in this case, they shoved, hero called, and the river came, Jack of Hearts, and it was irrelevant. The villain had picked up a second pair, 9s and 7s, on the turn to beat the one pair king. So what are you guys thinking in that spot? On the turn there, you check, facing the shove. What's going through your minds? Holding king on that run out.
I mean, I'm still feeling my nice sense of entitlement for having kings.
Yes.
I suffer from this a lot.
Me too.
My kings and aces.
Yeah.
They're just supposed to win.
Especially when you've got that 4th club, right? Because now you're really supposed to win.
Right. And the 9 just looks bad. It coordinates more with the board, and it's, when they shove, I don't know.
Yeah, this is a massive overshove too. That's the thing I think we have to talk about too. We have a pot of 45 blinds, and they've just shoved for 83, I think is what the post says. So,
yeah, it's almost twice.
It's almost a 2x overshove.
Actually, 77 effective.
Oh, effective. Okay, 70. Well, still, it's almost still a 2x overshove. It's still a massive shove here.
Yeah.
What do our kings beat? So again, I think at this point, like here, the question I would ask myself here is like, because there are very few bluffs I can really like think about in this range. It is possible some players might get really kind of antsy with some sort of ace of clubs X kind of holding, like an ace queen with the ace of clubs. Maybe they're bluffing with that kind of holding, like maybe. But most of villains' range, that's a small part of their range. Most of their range right now is value, all of which beats us. So the only thing that matters anymore is that we have the king of clubs. The rest of, I think that like we might as well have, like, think of this hand becomes king of clubs, queen of spades, or king of clubs, queen of hearts, right? Like that's what we're saying. Should I call with the king of clubs here? Because I can't think of a value hand that we beat. So I think villain is weighted heavily towards bluffs or towards value. So I think for those two reasons, I think this has got to be a fold, and because of the size of the bet. But that's my take.
Well, it's one of those spots where you're in this condensed part of your range now, even though you were near the top of your range pre-flop, just because of the texture of the board. The fact is, you don't have a value hand anymore, and so Chris's point is excellent. That it really comes down to how many bluffs do they have relative to how many value hands they're shoving here that they wouldn't have shoved on the flop. And I think just combinatorically, you end up with more value hands than I think makes it profitable to call. Now, I think we're all in that spot where we're like, oh, this monotone flop, this guy's shoving 2x because he knows I can't call, so I should call, right? Like it's that leveling war that we were talking about earlier, which is, okay, so he's, that player, because it is a polarizing, like whether there's enough bluffs in the range or not, it's what we would expect to be a polarizing bet. And I think when you're sitting there with king, you're thinking, well, if this is one of the times when he's bluffing, I've got him beat. And the problem is you just don't get to choose which times he's bluffing, which times he's not. Even if he's bluffing sometimes, they're probably not bluffing enough to make it profitable to call compared to the number of times that they're
right.
That's what I was going to say. We don't have enough players that are capable of making that play without having an actual real hand. Right. So at the minimum hand that guy's going to have is a flush. Now we happen to have two pair, but
right. Because we also have to remember this is a 3-bet hand too. I think like that's also what gets me to this like this person pre-flop called our 3-bet, and that should have eliminated a lot of those. So that's why like there are very few of those ace of club X combos, right? Like there's maybe ace queen, maybe ace jack. I don't maybe ace king. They're just calling a 3-bet. I mean,
they did get to close the action because there was some dead money in the pot too. So like they were getting pretty tempting odds to close the action with like a suited ace. But yes, I agree.
Right. No, but unsuited. I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because if they have suited clubs, they've got us beat, right? So I'm talking about they have the ace of clubs with a another suit in there. It just doesn't seem like there are that many of those left, and those are the only bluffs I can really come up with, unless they're just like bluffing air, which seems really risky in a 3-bet pot that we've shown some interest in.
And so Eric's original question was about bet sizing. So do we get rid of this guy if we 3-bet bigger pre-flop? That's the real question. I mean, he's sitting there with 9-7, right?
Right.
Yep.
How do you get rid of somebody? I mean, what bet size is good enough to get rid of somebody with 9-7 if the bet size we chose wasn't enough?
The only thing is, I think your hand is good enough to warrant a bigger bet, and you're giving them worse odds towards outdrawing you. Because, I mean, the smaller you can make the pot to stack ratio when you're so far ahead pre-flop, the better off you are.
It's a good point. That's where you want to be with those one pair hands, right? You want to be in a low SPR spot where you can just pull the bluff stream, you get the chips in the middle. That's all that matters. This is the only strategy some of us have. But in these high SPR spots where there's a lot of chips behind, having king, you're not. It really just, you might as well just have caught a piece of this flop and have a pair, because functionally your hand is the same strength compared to the action that we're seeing here. So it might be a spot to just kind of consider one of those, like, even in my whole range here, like, where is this in my distribution? Like, is king actually in a position where I should be calling as a bluff catcher here? Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You might be able to do it better with a hand with even less showdown value, maybe a better blocker or something like that. Kim?
I got the sense he was calling because he had the king of clubs, and he was calling to hit the flush, which with that sizing didn't really have the odds for hitting the flush there. So I'm just wondering if the sizing was different, if you would call here, or if you had ace with the ace of clubs. Would it be different? Because even with the king of clubs, you might already be beat.
Yes. Yep. Poker is fun, isn't it, folks? All right. Well, is there any other feedback we want to give to Eric here, E. Anderson 85, or other than excellent choice in imagery? This is I'm going to remember this one, Eric.
Yeah, those question marks are awesome.
So
if anyone hasn't seen this post, go look at the imagery. It's the best imagery post we've had.
And I try and say this every time. We go through the forum post and we sort of talk about some of the things just to get the conversation going. But you really should go to rec.poker, get a free community account. All it takes is an email address. And then you can go and post in the forums yourself. And you'll see we're just scratching the surface. Some of these posts get really intricate. Some of our great posters like ARW and Binkley and Jamel and a few of those other guys that really put in the time here. They break this down mathematically. They provide all sorts of great details and ways of thinking that we don't get into here. But go to rec.poker and check these out on your downtime. You'll get a lot more out of them if you can actually see it all laid out on the page. So barring any other points from the group, it looks like we're going to wrap it up for today. So I would like to thank Running Aces, Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, Website Amp, Learn Pro Poker, the small business community, Rob Washam, Kim, Chris, John. Thank you, everyone.